I just thought this was how marriages end. This is the season of the marriage. This was how it happens. What happens? But I did learn so much about myself. I have grown so much, and I don't think that would have happened otherwise. I think I would have just kept shrinking and becoming more of this shell, hard little kernel, and I absolutely love my life right now. I had a really interesting therapy session a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about the difference between solitude and loneliness. And I realized that I had nothing to be afraid of because I had been lonely. So really, and the solitude of living alone has been amazing for me in terms of just allowing me to, come back home to myself, as you said. But I think fear is the biggest thing that keeps women together.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition. Welcome back to the Life in Transition podcast. I am really excited today to have with us Pat Fenner, who is a podcast producer, author, and whose mission is to inspire those who are going through a gray or silver divorce. Pat, welcome to the Life in Transition podcast.
Thank you so much, Art, for having me. It's a pleasure. It's a joy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. So jumping right in, what would you consider to be one of the most meaningful, difficult, impactful transitions that you've been through in your life, Pat?
Well, okay, within the last 5 or 10 years, definitely the most impactful has been my divorce a little over 3 years ago. I was married for 37 years, and I don't know. Hindsight is always 20/20, right? So
Sure.
You could say kind of maybe should have seen the writing on the wall. But anyway, it blindsided me, and it was without sounding hyperbolic. It really was soul crushing. I'm a Christian. We don't have divorce in my family. My family of birth, and I never imagined this was an option. Like, it just didn't seem to me that this was going to happen, and it did. And we have 5 kids, and they had all. Well, the last one was still home. It was COVID, was going on and everything, and so she was doing high school, ready to graduate and stuff. So she was around for, unfortunately, a lot of the ugly stuff at the end. But the other 4 kids had gone. And I found myself 3.5 hours away from my adult kids, who I have a great relationship with. Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah.
Because really, and home in a beautiful home, probably the prettiest home I'll ever live in. But it was too far away from my people. We hadn't been there long enough for me to really establish relationships. We had moved out there probably just 3 or 4 years prior to that,
right,
for my ex-husband's job. But then 6 months after we moved, they fired him. So he went back to work, and he was on the road again to the place that he had been working on. So I was pretty much just like all alone here, and I was like, this isn't going to work.
So you said, Pat, that this divorce was definitely the most impactful transition, at least in the last 10 years. And you said you should have seen the writing on the wall, but let's not should on ourselves.
Thank you.
Right? Because it doesn't do any good anyway. But what have you learned from that phrase of like, oh, I should have maybe seen the writing on the wall? What have you learned that maybe other people that could still help to save their marriage, or help to know if the marriage is over, really? What have you learned that might be useful for others that you see now with a 3-year perspective, or with the hindsight 20/20, right? Of even, the 30 or 10 or 15 years of the last half of the marriage that you wish maybe you would have worked on before, or would have noticed before, to see what the real health of the marriage actually is.
Yeah. Well, the first thing right off the top was, if you feel lonely when you're together, that could be a clue. If you don't feel listened to, if you don't feel like your concerns are taken seriously.
Mm.
I remember this one time, oh my goodness, I had just started, just kind of like a side job, being a VA, and we were still living in, we were living in South Carolina, excuse me, and my oldest daughter and son-in-law were over visiting. And my son-in-law is a very, very interested person. He's very interested in other people. And he was like, how are things going with your new business? And we were chatting, and my husband had been out, I don't know, working out in the yard or something. Well, he came inside, and I immediately changed the subject. I was like, oh, it's lunchtime. Did you want me to fix you something to eat? And my two kids, my daughter and son-in-law, look at each other like, we're in the middle of a conversation. He's a grown-up. He can get his lunch, And I just immediately dropped it because he wasn't really for what I was doing. He didn't like the fact that I was doing a business that was online, that was, it was it was virtual assistant, right? VA. And it kind of triggered him. And so I sublimated what I was doing and the value, the importance of this business that I was proud of and that I was working hard just so I wouldn't upset the apple cart. Well, my daughter. And she brought that up to me. I mean, she said something about that later. And that's definitely a red flag, I would say. If your spouse is not, you can't have these open conversations about what you're doing. And even if you disagree, be able to shelf that sometimes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's, that's a sign of a codependent relationship, right? Where you can't be yourself and you feel like you need to, and you feel like you need to be validated by somebody else for you to be okay as well. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love what Jim Detmer talks about, co-committed relationships instead of codependent, right? That you're committed to each other, but you're also committed to yourself and committed to your own growth and spiritual growth and right. And who you are and being the kind of person that you would want to be with first and foremost. Right.
Yeah.
Up to the point of being willing to lose the relationship, which sounds counterintuitive.
Yes.
But the fact is, if you're holding on to something, if it's always, well, I could do this, but then I might lose the relationship, then you're automatically into codependency.
Right.
So even though it sounds really counterintuitive, it's actually really important to say, hey, I have standards and I have, I want to be seen and I want to see others and I'll be there for others, but it's got to be eye to eye. We've got to stand at the same level and really see each other. Right.
Yes.
And not be one subservient to the other or dependent on each other for the other's happiness.
And I want to say, I think back to your question about, red flags or signs. We had been in marriage counseling off and on over the years. And I think marriage counseling is good, even for a good marriage.
Sure.
That's right. It really is good to get that third person perspective on things. But when you are going for a particular issue and a counselor gives you homework, so to speak, and then you leave and you don't do the homework, that's a red flag.
Right.
We'd come home from counseling and I would just hear from him how much this isn't working. This is a waste of time. This is a waste of money. Like we're not doing it though. It's not going to be fixed automatically,
Right.
So that's kind of a red flag if you're not willing to put the work in. It takes work for a relationship.
Absolutely. Anything worthwhile does take work, right?
Absolutely.
And that's for sure. Yeah. So you said a red flag is that if you're lonely when you're together, which is, intuitively, it's like, wow, yeah, of course, that's huge. What does that feel like to you? What does that mean? What does that feel like to be lonely even when you're together?
Wow, that's an excellent question. Well, I'll talk about the symptom of it first. And it's very relevant to these days because people are always on their phones, right? Mm-hmm. So he would come home after being away for the week and be sitting on his phone. He'd go outside and he'd sit on his phone. He would come back in the living room. He'd come to the dinner table and sit on his phone. And it just felt like a total denial of me. Okay, I know you're here, but I have other relationships here on the other end of this phone that are more important.
Right. So he wasn't even actually there. You said when you're together. So you were physically in the same space.
Yes.
But he was not present with you.
no.
Okay.
And, I know that happens a lot. And I know there are some couples I know that they both seem to be doing that and they say they're fine with it. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm old school, but put the damn phone down when you're with you. Sorry.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
And it's not just because you're old school. There's a lot of studies done about the level of connection people experience. And when you're actually physically on your phone, just sitting next to each other, it's almost zero. But even if you have the phone, in silent mode and sitting over here on the side, right? Even if it's sitting here, you're out to dinner and your phone is sitting on the table, you have less meaningful and less deep conversations than if the
yes,
phone was, even if it's in silent mode, even if
yeah,
it's in your purse, or in your pocket or sitting under, like when you said your husband's sitting on his phone, I'm picturing actually sitting there on his phone, but you mean he was like looking at his phone, right? But even if you have it anywhere near your physical person, your conversations don't go as deep. There's new data on this now than if you left it in the car.
wow. Well, I'll tell you, I totally believe that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of data on this now because there's a part of our brain that's mentally tethered to this thing. So it's very hard to give our full attention to the conversation going on when that's right there, right?
Absolutely.
So some of my friends now, I've got two friends that actually I've had on the podcast recently, both of them, that leave their phones in the car when they go into a meeting, right? When they go to a lunch meeting or something. I just had breakfast with one of these friends it was Thursday or Friday. And he comes with a tiny little journal, so if he needs to make some notes or something, but the phone is in the car.
I love that.
And at our house, even with adult kids and everything, no phones ever come to the table, ever, right? Because they just interfere. And like you said, if the people you are with are not worth being with, then don't be with them, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
I can remember even when I was executive running a big, multi-billion-dollar company, I would go around to the plants, that were all my responsibility, and they would be giving me, Kaizen projects, like showing me the projects I've done the last couple of years or whatever, last couple of quarters that have really made a big difference. And sometimes I've already seen them, right? Because they came all the way into the management meeting, and then I'm coming back to the plant, but that's what they want to show me on the floor, and the workers are showing it to me themselves. So I would make the mistake sometimes, like, well, I've already seen this. So like I've got 3 texts coming in, one's from my boss. I'd look down a little bit, right? My VP of operations is this really wise woman. She ended up being president of this company after I left, and promoted her, and she did a much better job running it than me. It was really fantastic. But she told me, like right then, she pulled me aside. She stopped the presentation. She pulled me aside. Oh, you can't do that. I said, yeah, but Jennifer, because it was in the management team from your team, that I already know this. She goes, it has nothing to do with you. This is about seeing the people that have done the work to get it to where it is. It's nothing to do with what you already know or what you understand or anything. No, it's just about seeing the people, which is incredibly motivating. It's going to have $100 million of payback, 100 times payback for you in the team. So get off your phone. Don't ever be on your phone when these guys are presenting to you.
I love that.
And it really makes so much sense because it's totally saying you're not that important. And we're all guilty of it from time to time. But the thing is that, one, do I have the courage to remind my wife, or do you have the courage to remind your husband to say, hey, no phones at the table. Like or this is date night, or hey, I want to talk to you. Can you put your phone away? And you put it in the other room, right?
Yeah.
So we can really be present with each other.
I was lucky to get him to do it just on the kitchen counter or something,
Yeah. But that's a really important point. Like even before the phones were the computer and everything else. Like you have the whole world right now in your pocket. But even before that, when I just had a cell phone, like my wife, I just didn't notice. I'd come in the house half the time on the phone. Like I'm being efficient, right? I'm driving home from work. I'm handling calls. I'm getting stuff done. This is important, and then I walk in the house on the phone. And to me, it's like, oh, it's not that big a deal. I'll just, when I'm done 5 or 10 minutes later, then I'll greet my wife and everything's fine. She's here anyway. Right. Right. Because there's this physical age old thing about when you see somebody, you greet them and you connect with them. And they can't do that if you're on the phone, and you can't do that if you're on, so it's like, she asked me, this is even young in our marriage. This was probably, we've been married almost 25 years ago. We've been married 31 years now.
Wow.
She said, hey, can you please not come in the house ever at the end of the work day when you're on the phone? Because I want to say hi to you. I want to have your attention. I want to see you. I want you to see me. And I said, yeah, okay. Now, sometimes I would sit in the driveway. Not much better, because she complained about that eventually too. And not like she was complaining, but saying, hey, I see you pulling the driveway, then I'm ready to greet you. And it's better than coming in on the phone, but it's not much better. So then mostly I would just be off. But if not, I'd stop, 500 yards down the road
just to
and finish
it.
up the call, right? So that we can be together when I get there.
But
So
you know what? The motivation behind that, though, was not control. The motivation behind that was love. She wanted
absolutely.
to.
Yeah, she wanted to connect with me. She wanted to see how the day, and she doesn't want to be like left on hold, right? Because that's basically what I'm doing without thinking about it. That's what I was doing. It's like, hey, I'm just putting you on pause. Like, she's sitting there on pause, like waiting for me to get off the phone. She doesn't know if it's going to be 5 seconds or 5 minutes or 50 minutes, right? So I think the phone can really separate us. But so that's one way that you would feel alone. Or there are other ways that you felt alone even when you were together?
Yeah, just it was a general lack of connection. It was clear that after a while he didn't want to be here with us. It was really hard for my youngest daughter because as I said, we had 5 kids, and most of the time a lot of them were around in different permutations. But by the time we had done this last move before the divorce, it was only my youngest daughter living at home. And so she went from like youngest of 5 and being doted on and always having, the big kids around to play with and talk to and whatever, to being an only child.
Right.
In addition, she saw stuff that was going on that, she and I have had conversations about and processed through it since then. But she saw stuff that she probably shouldn't have seen, or wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
And then it was COVID too during that time. So she was really lonely and in a really bad place. And I was not in a position to be able to deal with that at the time because I was just, dealing with this other stuff. So, so she acted out a little bit, and
Sure.
I couldn't really talk to my ex about that either because it instantly became, what am I doing wrong? Why aren't I handling it? What, because you're around, why aren't you taking care of it? Well, because I'd like to talk to you about it. This
right.
Like to have a partner. Question of,
co-parent with.
It wasn't a question of wanting to put blame on anybody. It was like, how can we work together? And that never really happened either. So that's a very lonely feeling that you have to be as a single parent when you're not single.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one thing I can't imagine. I can't imagine being a single parent or being a single parent. Well, you're not single, either one. I can't imagine. Right. Kudos to all those that manage to do that for whatever reason, because that would be very, very tough. This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by MidLife Transition Mastery. If you have reached midlife and you are successful, you have checked all the boxes, you've done everything you thought you should do, and especially pleasing everybody else, doing what you think everyone else needs you to do, but you still feel like something's missing, like you're coming up empty, feeling alone, feeling misguided or lost. MidLife Transition Mastery Explorer community is for you. Here we will build authentic community. We will learn about the 8 steps to mastering midlife transition. And we will learn and execute living life with no regrets in our second half. Please check out the community on lifeintransition.online/MLTM, Midlife Transition Mastery. And I look forward to seeing you around the fire in this community. When did you know that the marriage was over?
Well, it's a really good question because there was a certain amount of gaslighting that went on. I remember one time he called me on the phone. He was at work, and he said, hey, we had done something called gap years with 2 of our kids after high school, right? Yep. And you're familiar with that. He said, I just found out this concept of gap years for marriage. He said, you guys want to go? He said, do you want to take a gap year with our marriage? I was like, and honestly, at the time, it sounded like a great idea because I was like, Well, nothing else has worked, so
Right.
sure, why
Yeah.
not? Let's
Yeah.
try this. I don't know how that's going to work.
Right.
So I don't. Obviously, nothing happened with that. And then another time, he came home and he said, "I made an appointment with this lawyer to talk about how we can rearrange our finances, or correct our finances, or deal with something like that." And I'm thinking, lawyer and finances, okay. So got to the lawyer, and the lawyer was talking all about the divorce process in South Carolina. And I was really confused. And I left there and I was like, did you know that this was supposed to be about divorce? I thought this was talking about to retooling our finances, or. And he's like, oh yeah, I don't know that. I don't know where that came from. But the whole meeting was about this and explaining the laws
Wow.
in South Carolina. And I just left very confused. So I mean, I don't know how he could not have known.
Which he obviously did know. But then it shows about maybe how codependent in both directions, that he still couldn't say, yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's because I want to get a divorce. Right.
Yes.
So at that point, he's
Yeah.
still saying, like, trying to, like hoping you'll get it without him having to say it and all this.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is at one point when our last daughter, youngest daughter, left for college, a few years prior to this, we had decided that after we were taking, I had been taking care of his two parents. His mom and dad were divorced too, but they were living with us. His dad was living with us, and his mom was at a senior care facility, whatever, near us. And so I was caring for them. And then, our youngest daughter was in high school, and we had talked about it and said, well, when the two of them pass and our youngest goes to college, we'll move back to Georgia, because I love Georgia. I mean, we raised our kids here. This has become home. And so they passed. I took her to college, and before I left for college, I put the house on the market, and I called him. I said, the realtor that sold it to us is going to sell it for us. We had like 7 offers I was only gone a week and a half to take her to school. And we had an offer by the time I came back. And I said, the house is sold. We need to get everything put away, moved. Of course, he was very angry about this, even though he agreed, to all this stuff in the process. And so he started moving. So he said he had a friend that who had property that he could move this stuff to. So for months he started, because we closed. We had to ask them for a little delay so we could get everything together in closing. And while he was doing that, he was taking all his property to this woman's house. So he had all his stuff there already, because he said, I can't live alone. I can't do that. You're living alone already. I don't know, whatever. All these kind of things are red flags. And all right, let me tell you though, you're right. There was 2 levels of codependency here, but even worse is the feeling that, well, I guess this is the best that marriage is going to be. I don't know that there was a show on, I think it was Netflix. Was it Grace and Frankie?
Okay.
And it was 2 big stars that I can't think of their names, but you absolutely would know them. And it was 2 couples that had been friends for a long time, and the husbands actually ended up they both got divorced, and the husbands ended up getting together. So that was a little different, but there was a show, and there was a scene in the first episode, that the woman is like in front of the bedroom, just kind of brushing her hair, ready to go to bed at night, and her husband comes behind her and says, didn't you have any idea that something was wrong? I mean, we really haven't been close in years. Like, did you not even have any thought? And she said to him, I just thought this was how marriages end. This is the season of the marriage. This was how it happens. What happens? Art, I'm telling you, ugly cries, because that's what I thought. Maybe this is just what happens.
Yeah.
And I didn't have, my kids even tell me, Mom, you have grown so much. Like, I didn't have any thought that I was worth better, that I deserved better, that I could do better too. like I was just kind of stuck in this little tiny kernel, and shows up even in the divorce. I didn't the paperwork and stuff and how we divided everything. I should have pushed back on things that I didn't, and I know I'm not going to should have on me, but if I had been healthier, I would have done that. And but I'm grateful that it. I mean, I'm not grateful to have gone through all this, but I am grateful at what came from it. I mean, if this is what it took to realize that I don't deserve that, I don't need that. I can do more. I can be more, and I want someone who is willing to do and be more with me.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not a competition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you look at talking about, that you're not happy that this happened, but you can see on the other side of it. So where do you think your life would be now if you hadn't got divorced? Like if you hadn't gone through this transition, where would your life be now?
It just would have come later. I really, it was inevitable, because when we first started looking for properties in Georgia after we sold the place, we were looking together, and we thought we could not. He didn't like any places. He was too busy, he said, to find a place, but he didn't like any of the places I found. Blah blah blah. It was terrible, and I said, why don't I just get my own place? And he's like, yeah. And I should tell you a little story about that. Okay, so I hadn't worked in 37 years since my oldest son was born. I'd been a home educator for 25 of those years. And then so I didn't have any marketable skills, air quotes there.
Yeah, exactly.
And
thank you for at least the air quotes, right?
Yes, at least the air quotes.
Because there's a lot goes into being a home educator that's very marketable, but most people don't think that.
That's right. There are, whatever. And so just prior to my father-in-law's death, he had pulled the boys aside, my ex and his brother, and said, I want to refigure my will. The two boys were going to get half each at first. And he said, I want Pat to get a third. I want you to redo this. And I want her to get a third in her name, in her separate name. And so I think at the time, my ex was thinking, oh, this is great. I ended up with 2/3 of the inheritance, right? Because we weren't talking divorce then. So the money that my father-in-law left me, I used to buy my own place. And there was no way I could have done that otherwise, because I couldn't even rent. I discovered I couldn't even rent because I didn't have 2 years of employment history.
Right.
So I started out when I moved back to Georgia, living with my oldest daughter, feeling like, oh boy, was this the right thing to do? I left him now. I can't even rent an apartment. I'm living with my daughter, who was very gracious about it. And her husband are always like, if you ever want to come live with us, you're fine. And I think we could make it work. But I don't want to do that.
Right, right.
I don't want to do that. Maybe when I'm 80, who knows? But
Right,
I had a couple of years before then. And so it was, I feel like I'm talking to my therapist, Art.
I've been told that
But
before.
I did learn so much about myself. I have grown so much, and I don't think that would have happened otherwise. I think I would have just kept shrinking and becoming more of this shell, hard little kernel. And I absolutely love my life right now. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but, there's stresses.
Of course.
And of course.
But how long had it been since you could have said that? How long, but how many years was the last time how many years ago was it the last time you could have said, I really love my life right now?
Oh my gosh. Probably when I was still homeschooling. I loved homeschooling. I loved having my kids around. We just.
So was that 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
Probably 15 years ago.
15 years ago. Yeah. So that's a long time. So that's maybe another sign. Right.
Yeah.
That's something. But it may not be the marriage, but something's got to change if you don't feel like
Right.
that you can live, that you love your life. How did this divorce and the following growth that you've had, how did it affect your other relationships? your relationship to yourself, relationship to other people that you're really close to?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it made me a lot more comfortable being transparent, being vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
apologizing. There were things that I had done to my kids that weren't great.
All parents do.
Yeah, some things that directly came out of the hurt of being married to their dad, which I
Sure.
didn't realize at the time, and I was
Right.
able to with counseling. So we had conversations about these. There's nothing I don't feel. It'd be interesting to ask my kids, but I don't feel there's anything that we can't talk about right now.
Oh, that's awesome. And that's different than it was before.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah. The one thing that we don't talk about too much is their dad,
Sure.
because I still can get, I mean, it's like 3.5 years, I guess now, but I can still get triggered by certain things. And so I just don't want to go there.
Mm-hmm. That's
No.
understandable. That's the work you're still working on. It's work you still have to
Yep.
do.
Yep. So
I think that it's, I love what Michael Singer talks about. When we get triggered, it's a great opportunity to practice relaxing and letting it go. When something comes up, it's because we need to let it go through us. When we resist it, when we push it back down, when we say, I just don't go there because I get triggered, which it's not appropriate to get triggered in certain situations, but at some point to let yourself get triggered, to let it move through you so that it no longer triggers you.
Oh, I love that.
All
yeah.
Right? So his thing is like, if something comes up, great, let it come up, let the feelings, feel the feelings, like, let it so that it can move, so that it can keep moving through you instead of being blocked.
Yes.
All right. So
I love that visual too. Oh, that's good.
But so in general, you'd say you definitely have much more, if I put a word in your mouth, but I think I'm hearing authentic relationships.
Definitely.
With yourself as well as your kids.
Yes. I have gotten into the habit, into the practice, of checking in with myself. How you doing?
Mm-hmm.
How did, at the end of the day, how'd the day go? What are some things, processing the same things I imagine someday processing over a glass of wine with somebody special at the end of the day.
Right.
Because I'm somebody special right now for
there
me.
You go.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. And I think that's really important to take some inventories, to be aware of your feelings. So like, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling in my body? Right.
Yeah.
If you're really brave, you even say who's feeling it, like what part of you is feeling it, because there's a lot of these trigger points, all of these trigger points that things comes up. That's where we have something that's traumatic from the past that gets broken off a little bit. So there's a part of us that stays in arrested development. Because it served us well for protection at that point in our life, often even when we were young kids, 5 or 6 years old, but it doesn't serve us anymore.
Right.
Right. And so to engage that part, not to push it away, not to belittle it, not to resist it, but to engage it and heal it so that it doesnn't have to trigger you anymore, to let it go. All right.
Oh, that's good. I like that. Thank you for that little nugget.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Stuff I practice every day. And I've been doing it for a long time because it's really important. How has it affected your health, your overall well-being? If you think about the 4 dimensions of health, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, how has it affected your health in this time since the divorce?
Well, I think the biggest way actually is my physical, because and I think any mom in my generation who's raised kids will relate to this. When the kids are home, if you have to make the choice between going to the doctor for yourself or going to the doctor for the kids, guess who wins? And so, and it's not. I mean, it's what we do. I'm not necessarily proud of it. It just is what it is. What it is, right? But as a result, I did not take care of my own health very well for years. So, I'm getting my checkups. I'm going to the dentist. I'm doing all the things. I'm still doing counseling, which just for me, because I need it.
Absolutely.
And and so it's really wonderful. I'm in a church that I absolutely love.
Awesome.
And I just take care of myself, like all 4 areas.
And it's really important. But let me ask you this. So and the answer is already clear because I asked you the question a minute ago, but since you start taking care of yourself, we know your health's better, but how has that shown up for you in your relationships as well? So the reason we justify not taking care of ourselves is because we're taking care of others. But how have your relationships changed since you started taking care of yourself?
That's a great question. Well, I have relationships. Like, first of all, I'm in a business networking group. I've established friendships there. I've just through my podcasting and business, through my writing, I've met people, and I don't I don't have to feel like, oh, I'd love to go out for coffee, but I got to check with Paul because I know he's going to be home that weekend. Like, life isn't complicated. It's just so much simpler, and it makes me more open to saying yes to opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wonderful. It's really wonderful to get to know somebody on a deeper level, and you're being, it's your deeper level. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Like,
So
I'm
you're being
doing it.
authentic, you're being vulnerable, you're being transparent.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
by taking care of yourself, you can show up in those ways. Whereas if you're not, like, it's a lot harder to, if you're tired, if your health isn't right, if your
Right.
sleep's not
Right.
good, right? If you're
And the other thing is, now that I'm I'm back in Georgia, but I'm not where we raised our kids. I'm in the Atlanta area, and so most of my relationships now are new people, so they don't know me pre-marriage, or
interesting. Yep.
pre-divorce, and so I can really be. It was very exciting because when I first started meeting people, I was like, okay, who do I want to be? Like, who do I want to be? Not that I want to be, put on a facade, but what feels real to me.
That's right.
And
I would say
it
it's
was,
not even who do I want to be? Who am I?
who am
Who
I?
am
That's
I really? Because
absolutely
that's really what it is. I call it, coming home to myself,
yes,
right?
yes,
It's not going and finding myself. It's coming home to
right,
myself. Like, who am
right.
I?
Yeah. Although I have to say there is a certain amount of finding myself because I had been so squelched, or allowed myself that I really didn't know, like, what kind of things do I want to try? Like, what am I
Yeah,
still
absolutely.
interested in? Like, but in terms of relationships with people, you're right. It's who am I?
And I think it's, when I say finding myself, like, that has a connotation to me of going outward, of looking outward, right? I got to go find myself out there somewhere. I got to go, but the inward journey is coming home to myself, right? And then
Yes.
from that, coming home to myself, then it's clear, like, what are the things that I like to do? How do I want to spend my time? How do I want to serve? How do I want to celebrate? How do I want to grow? Right? The things that
Right.
are important to every human being. How do I want to
Yep.
contribute? Right? Those show up. What, I mean, for somebody that's feels stuck or lonely in a marriage that's a gray or silver, as you say in your introduction here, what advice would you give them? What would you say to somebody to maybe save them from being blindsided 10 years later or 5 years later or 20 years later?
Yeah. Well, I know probably what kept me was fear.
Fear of what, Pat?
Fear that, like, oh, I couldn't live on my own. I couldn't support myself. These are all heavily air quoted here.
Right. If
But
you're not watching the video yet, Pat's got the air quotes going.
right, I got the air quotes going here. I couldn't do. How would I support myself? I mean, honestly, even at the divorce, I pictured myself like as a greeter for Walmart, and no insult, to them, but I was like, who's going to have me? Who would have me? Like, who would want me to work for them? And so I was just afraid of all kinds, on all kinds of levels. Living alone, being lonely. Although I had a really interesting therapy session a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about the difference between solitude and loneliness. And I realized that I had nothing to be afraid of because I had been lonely.
Right. You had been lonely even inside your marriage for a long time.
Right. And the solitude of living alone has been amazing for me in terms of just allowing me to, like to come back home to myself, as you said. But I think fear is the biggest thing that keeps women together. And whether it's, and also fear, we raised our kids in the Bible Belt. So there's fear of
The stigma
what's the
and so
church?
forth.
Yeah. What's the
But
church going to say?
let me ask you a question, not specifically about that though, but about, like, if you, let's say 20 years ago, so you're married 37 years, you've been divorced 3, so 40, so halfway through your marriage, 20 years ago, Pat, if you had the courage not to ask for a divorce at that point, but to come home to yourself and to show up who you really are, what do you think would have happened? Would it have precipitated a divorce quicker, or would it have precipitated a working relationship? Or
Honestly, I think it probably would have saved the marriage. because I think of things like back in '08 with the housing bubble. My ex had been he still is in construction, but at that time he had his own house building construction building
Right.
business. And when the bubble burst, his business came,
Yeah, like
folded.
so many others in that point in real estate.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it got to the point one time. I remember he came home and he was just like sitting. We had this recliner in the living room, and he just was looking so lost. And I went to him and I said, "Honey, I think you're depressed. Do maybe you should try to talk to him." Well, I mean, he just absolutely, you know, he yelled. He was like, "What do you know? You don't know. I'm under a lot of pressure." I mean, he pretty much confirmed what I what I was saying by telling me I didn't know what I was saying. But see, if I had not had that fear of him, of losing the relationship, of being embarrassed in front of my kids when they see him behave like that, um, I think I would have fought back in a good way. No,
Yeah. No, I hear you. Like you
what
would
I
have
mean?
stood up for him. You would have stood your ground. You would have had confidence.
Yeah,
Like, no, hun, we need to get some help.
yeah,
And it's nothing to be ashamed of. This is a really difficult thing that you've been through. You've lost your business.
right,
Guess what? You're not alone. There's a lot of people going through it. Doesn't make it any easier, but let's get
right,
some help together.
yeah. And there were things like that happened over the years. He took a job probably around that time frame that you just are bringing up that started him working out of town and traveling a lot. And I said, this is really hard. Can we do something? Meanwhile, ironically, the counselor that we were seeing at that time had been in construction when his kids were little and was traveling. And he went back to school. He delivered pizzas so he could go back to school to get a counseling degree so he could work at home,
Right.
so he didn't have to
Right.
travel.
Yeah, no, it's
And
interesting. And I think that's really important for people to hear. So you're talking about, inspire people that are going through a gray or simple
yeah,
divorce. But I would like to inspire maybe even before that, because we think we're protecting the marriage by not coming home to ourselves, by not standing up for ourselves. And what we're actually doing, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I have a brother that just went through this, is we're actually sabotaging the marriage.
yeah,
Right. He had said really clearly, hey, if I had started doing my work earlier, not if she had started doing her work earlier, if I had started doing my work earlier,
yeah,
even though he wanted to at the end, he was not the one that went out of the marriage. But if I had started doing my work earlier, then the marriage could have been saved. But I was afraid. I didn't want to upset my wife.
yeah,
So I went along.
yeah,
And what did that earn me? It earned me a divorce. Right? So it's like we think the appeasement, the codependency is helping the marriage. It's not.
it's not.
Right. And I was curious if that was your experience as well. And that's why I asked that question. But I think it's really important to realize that standing up for what we think is best, regardless of what, the outcome is, to make the right decision, to stand up, even if we think it maybe damages the relationship, in the long term, it's actually going to prosper the relationship.
Yeah.
Or
And
it's not worth having anyway.
That doesn't mean it's not going to be easy.
No, that it's going to be easy. No, it's going to be difficult. Yeah.
It is, because both of us came from dysfunctional families in different ways.
Yeah.
Well, we all do. Tell me a family that's not dysfunctional.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be at least 90%, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
probably going even higher, honestly. But anyway, so anyway, we came from dysfunctional families, different things, and we actually, it was interesting because each of us didn't, for a while, we're not able to see our own dysfunction, in our own family. We saw with the other person, but not ours.
Right.
Which was really
interesting. But that's fairly normal, right? But if you have a sense, for now talking to all the listeners out there that are still in the marriage, right? But if you have the sense about something that you feel is right for you or for your partnership, for your partner or your partnership, the relationship together, own it, speak up for it, stand up for it. Don't get stuck in being right, but at least have your say. At least ask for what you want. You don't always get it. The power is in the asking, being clear about what you want, right? And it actually counterintuitive actually will maybe save the relationship.
Yeah.
Even though it feels like you might be risking it. It does feel. I mean, I've been there in my marriage, right? Where I've thought, do I dare say this? Well, guess what? I don't dare not to say it because that's what I need. And it doesn't mean I get it, but at least to ask for it, right? And our relationship is so much better. I mean, I had very high confidence when I got married that I would be still married today. but I didn't, because sort of like the programming you're talking about, like marriage gets worse over time and you quit having sex and it just sort of fizzles out. And,
Right. Yeah.
not my experience. I mean, I keep working on it and my marriage is better and better and better like every year, and it's not easy. And there's still times where I think, are we really meant for each other? Can I really, if I say this, is it going to blow it up? And then
but you got to feel safe to say that.
No, that's right. And it's, and acknowledge something. I mean, this sounds really bad or whatever. It's a lot easier to feel safe as a bigger, stronger guy, just from a physical standpoint, right? Than for a woman. I acknowledge that, right? But it's still, I mean, I still very codependent. When my wife doesn't like me, then I have nothing, and I'm all alone. And I mean, all this stuff, right? But it is really like our relationship in the last 5 years has gotten so much better, and it was already really good because both of us have been really willing to stand up for what we think we need.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. And to be codependent or co-committed. We're committed to each other, whether we stay in a relationship or not. We want what's best for ourselves and best for the other person, whether we stay in a marriage or not, and not codependent. I don't need my wife to be happy for me to be happy. She doesn't need me to be happy for her to be happy. Right.
And actually, I would say, although the title, I should republish this with another title or publish a second book, because I would say, even if you haven't gone through a gray divorce, but if you're in a gray season of your marriage, like, use the stuff in that book for yourself. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
Because a lot of the stuff in there is like helping you come home to yourself and stand up for yourself. Like, you need to be there for yourself, and they're techniques that ideally you would use while you're married that would save your marriage. I wrote it. It was pretty much therapy for me after my...
What's the title of your book, Pat?
Rebuilding Your Life After a Gray Divorce, A Path to Healing, Significance, and Joy.
Nice. This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Transition Mastery Coaching. If you have made it to midlife and you're successful and you are going through transitions in your life, in your business, in your career, or in your organization, and you're looking to master those transitions, to make the most of them, to accelerate into the next phase of your organization or your life. If you're facing, challenges in your business, challenges in your relationship, challenges in your health, and you really want to transition those quickly, I'm here to guide you for that. And I look forward to working with you. And you can sign up for either Pinnacle Transition Coaching or Summit. Please go to lifeintransition.online/MLTM and scroll to see the Summit and Pinnacle Coaching, or reach out to me directly on my email, art@artblanchford.com. And I look forward to connecting with you and helping you to accelerate your transitions to achieve what it is that you want to achieve in the second half in your organization and in your life, so you can live your whole life with no regrets. But yeah, I love what you said about to use those tools also to find it inside. And I sort of scoffed at the idea of a gap year in marriage because it sounded like a hall pass, like the movies Hall Pass, right? But I also know, like, I have some friends in the generation above me, right, that didn't have a hall pass. Like, they didn't have other relationships, but they lived separately for a couple of years.
Wow. And
then they got back together, right? But it was what they both needed at the time. There was a lot of stress in their environment, not just in their relationship, but in their environment. Other things going on with other family members and things. And it gave them a chance to get a little bit cleaner about the finances and, how, not to take from each other, but to just be clear about it, and what's going on. And then they also learned to appreciate each other when they didn't have each other for a while, or not as much, right? Yeah. Because they were living a couple hours apart. They had something like that. So it's not it wasn't a gap year like, oh, let's go have relationships with other folks, but let's take some time and come home to ourselves a little bit more, do our own work before we make a decision to get divorced. I'd say, if you could use it like that. I've never heard of that actually being successful, but that's kind of cool. Yeah,
and honestly, I think like the generation above us, that's a pretty radical move for older people.
Yep.
That's neat.
But they're having a good relationship now, whatever it is, 10 years later, right?
Yeah.
So cool. I think that's also a possibility. If you could give, So that's the advice that, you would have for somebody in the marriage. Is there some advice you would give somebody where it's now clear the marriage is really over? Like if you were to go back and talk to your younger self, Pat, even just 3 years ago or 5 years ago, what advice would you give yourself? And by means of that, what advice would you give to somebody that's going through that's in the midst of a gray or silver divorce?
Yeah. Oh, you have no idea how wonderful your life can be. Like, there are people who go through their whole lives with this spirit of gratitude and looking for the good stuff and finding it because they're looking for the good stuff. And it's out there. And you are worth more than just staying, curled up, not knowing yourself, or worse, giving up on yourself for the other person. That person isn't for you if they're not for you, And I probably would have, and my adult kids, actually, one of them said to me when I told them we were getting a divorce, said, "Why did you wait so long?"
Yeah.
And of course I was that generation that we keep stay together for the kids, right?
And they're wondering why you stayed together that long.
Yeah. They're like, yeah. So
that really comes back to like, you are worthy. Just by being a child of God, you have this inherent dignity that's worth to be explored and to grow and to shine, to bloom where you're planted, to take a nice Christian, saying, right?
Right.
Whether you're in a marriage or out.
Right.
And if that causes the marriage to end, then sort of, sorry to say it this way, but so be it.
Yeah.
Because if somebody doesn't want you to be who you are, to be the child of God that you are, then maybe that's not the right person to be with. And if you do that early enough, maybe it also saves the marriage because it inspires them to do the same work on their own side of the street.
Yeah. If somebody's listening to this that has not started divorce proceedings, I would say, like, first start doing some work on yourself. And then it was interesting. When we were in the last marriage counseling together, we were seeing the counselor together, and then we'd see them separately.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me one time, she said, when you push back, she said, in biology, there's that, I forget the name of the term, when everything needs to stay together, right?
Yeah, homeostasis?
Yes, homeostasis. Thank you. So if you start pushing up, he's going to be pulling you down because this is how we were. We were fine.
Right.
And so when you're doing these things, like you expect pushback, that's okay.
Yeah, that's
this
right.
is all new. And I was so, conflict averse that I just, it was really, really, really hard. And I just bought into the stuff he'd say. He when I was pushing back, he would be like, "This isn't working." I'm like, No, this is good. Let's try this, But
yeah, anyway. So maybe there is to say, hey, you know what? It's working for me because I need to take care of myself. I need to love myself. I need to grow as a human being. I need to, have my chance to, actualize myself. Right.
Yes.
And
who knows? You could influence the relationship. Yeah. That would be awesome.
That's right. Yeah, if you can go together. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know. When my wife and I got married, we said the only grounds for divorce would be that over a long period of time, one of us stops growing and the other one doesn't, and is trying to hold the other one back.
Oh.
Right. And typically, unfortunately, sorry, guys, I'm going to throw us under the bus, guys out there, but typically it's the guy that stops growing.
Yeah.
Women devote themselves to raising the kids, and then they wake up one day and go, "Wow, who am I? How can I come home to myself?" And they want to grow again, and the husband's settled into his routine, right? But that's the one caveat that we had when we got married, because I just don't feel that it's right to be a ball and chain on either person, right? Really,
right?
And that we would support each other in growing, and we always have, right? That's one of our top values for us is to continue to grow, and there's been seasons when she's pushed me on that, and there's been seasons when I've pushed her on that, right? But we've all, during those seasons, the good thing is at least one of us was doing the growth, was doing the work,
right?
And could pull and inspire the other one a little bit to do the same thing. And it might look very different, right? But that's been really, really important to us. And I think that's
a very mature grounds for divorce concept.
Yeah, and we had that conversation when we were 22 years old.
That is okay. That's just amazing. That's amazing.
I mean, we had some help. We did this workshop. It's not around anymore, but called the Institute for Self-Actualization.
Wow.
Eventually, they renamed it to Waking Up Weekend, but we did that a lot before we got married, 4 or 5 times together. So we had a really clear communication and so forth before we got married.
That's
and we've
excellent.
continued to to lean on that. And
Yeah.
it's not always been easy. And there's been times, ooh, right. But when we got to the point where we would be, I don't know what's the right word to call this, something like enslaving ourselves
Oof.
in the marriage, in the relationship, because it's enslaving. It's a choice, right?
Mhm.
Right. So when we got to a point where we would be really not being who we are, really pushed on either side, the other one would be like, no. And then there'd be this really uncomfortable conversation, and then we'd like this metamorphosis, and then somehow reach another level together. And those happen, fairly frequently, every year,
Yeah.
two,
Yeah.
something like that, right? We have
Well,
these
it's
little,
easy to get, and it happens before you know it. To get like just copacetic. Everything's fine.
yeah,
It's
fine.
fine. It's all fine.
It's okay. Don't bother me. I mean, I'll give you one little tiny, because it's fun example for us. Like there's a lot of things that I like that she doesn't like. There's a lot of things she likes that I don't like. One of the things we both like is movies. I don't watch them near as much, but I do really enjoy movies, and I love watching them with her.
Aw.
So we would have movie nights, and we would try to find a compromise of, what do you feel like? What do you feel like? No, what do you feel like? It got to a point where I hated that process so much, I didn't want to have a movie night. But I was always like wanting to be nice. This is sort of the codependent, I'll call that codependent movie night, where we're trying to take responsibility for the other person's happiness.
Right.
So I said, hey, and I heard this somewhere, something, I don't know where I pulled this from, but somewhere I said, okay, let's change it up. You get to pick one night. I don't even want to hear what it is, and I'll be happy to watch it with you because you pick it. And I get to pick the next night, the next time. And it's been amazing is no longer, and it's even the extent, like sometimes, one of us will say, oh, well, it's between this and this. What do you think? And I'm like, nope, your choice. I don't want to have any input. I don't want you choose exactly what you want, and I'll watch it with you because that's what you want. And we've had our movie nights are completely transformed. And she's picked movies I never would have thought she would pick.
Wow.
And that I've really, really enjoyed. And there's been some that I've not that much enjoyed, but I enjoy being there with her anyway. Right. And I've probably picked one that she didn't enjoy that much, but whatever it is, we watch it together. And it's completely transformed. But that's because it's like I get to see, what is it she really wants to watch? Yeah. And and she picked the story about Michael Jordan, which sort of blew me away. I didn't think that she'd be picking sports movies, but there's several, but that's just an example of sort of going from codependent in a way of like, how can I make my wife happy in movie night to this is my turn. She's going to be there for me on my turn, and then it's her turn, and I'll be there for her. And then I get to see her as she is, and she gets to see me as I am.
Yeah.
And it's so much more fun. And we don't spend like 30 minutes movies, or restaurants or anything else, right? It's your turn to pick. Okay. Right. And so we don't have this sort of, it just cuts the codependency out. Right?
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
And then to apply that, to bigger things as you go along.
Yeah.
2 last questions,
Okay.
Pat. If there is one, and I know we've sort of covered this, but if there's one small actionable tool that you could give your listeners that are alone in their relationship, especially the gray or silver ones, but if there's someone that feels alone in their relationship, there's one tool that they can hit pause button on this podcast right now and go use to take a step. Maybe it's a first very, very small step toward not being alone in their relationship. What would that be?
Well, I would definitely say to pick up a journal and start writing. Mm-hmm. Now, I know there's been, well, what do I write about? I'm not a writer. It's only for you.
Yeah.
It's not for anybody else. Unless you decide to share
later on, right? You don't have to make that decision now, for sure.
No. Right. And just start writing about how you feel. What are you thinking of? What do you like? What do you like about your relationship? If you're married, because that's important to think about. Absolutely. As well as maybe what's not quite gelling. Yeah. Just start writing whatever comes to mind, and then get in the habit of doing that. It just clarifies things. I mean, I know my sister's always saying, well, that's easy for you to say because you're a writer, but that's not. Writing has nothing to do, being an author has nothing to do with writing in a journal at all.
Right. And so what would that process look like? Do you do it the same time every day? How long do you do it for? When you say pick, I mean, if I've never journaled before, what's the one small step I can take? Well,
see, this is the thing. It's going to look at it as a discovery, as an exploration, because it's going to look different for different people. Some people don't, want to write something before they're feet hit the bed in the morning. Some want to do it last minute. Some people do it over lunch. Like it has to, however you do it, it has to work for you.
1 page or 10 pages or 5 minutes or 30 minutes or?
Well, if you don't know what to write, I'd set a timer. Just start with 5 minutes and just write for 5 minutes at a time of day that you will do it. Because if it's not something that fits into, and it will be a little awkward at first anyway, because it's just something new. But if it's not something that you can gradually, make a part of your day, you'll stop doing it. And then it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah.
But
so
it's a way
5
of
minutes a day, sometime in there, just keep your hand moving for 5 minutes. Doesn't matter what comes out.
Right.
But you said sometime when you attach it to something else, if it's lunch or breakfast or before you go to bed or after you get up or whatever, but attach it to something else and write for 5 minutes a day.
Yeah.
And see what comes out.
Yeah. Definitely attach it to something. What is that?
James Clear.
Atomic Habits. Yeah. Right.
But it's very effective. It is.
That's why it works.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Now that's a great tool. And I if you look at my journals, and I write quite a bit journaling, right? Because it's so powerful, clearing the mind. You'll see a line every once in a while that just goes writing, because I don't know what else to write. But I keep my hand moving.
Yes.
Right. And then some point the writing will change to something else. But it usually doesn't go for more than about one line, usually, of just writing.
Well, and usually I find that when I'm sick and my head feels kind of cloudy, I'm like, I don't want to get out of this habit, but I really can't think right now. So I just keep doing I'll do stuff like that, writing.
Yeah, but there is something magical about that. That's a great tool. And then last question, Pat. Where can people find out more about you if they want to get your book, or they want to connect with you and learn about you from a podcasting perspective, or from inspiring people going through relationship challenges? Where can they learn more about you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, well, my book is on Amazon, so and I will be coming out with a journal within. Well, what is it? The creeks don't rise. I'll be coming out with my journal within the next month or so. But that's on Amazon. And then I do want to leave a link, give you a link. One of the things that we talked about earlier was like not really knowing what we like, what we want to do, and all that stuff. And a long time ago, when I started retiring from being a home educator, I put this program together, and I put a PDF called the Interest Inventory and Super Skills Survey. And I realized it had a lot to do with where I am right now in life. Again, and I revisited that. So I'll give you a link if you want to put in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for people.
And can people connect with you on a website or?
Yeah, I was just going to say my website is patfenner.me. And you can, if you want gray divorce resources, it would be /gray divorce. And I'll give you that link too, so you could add that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, Pat, I really appreciate the authentic conversation that you shared with us today. And I appreciate the energy and the optimism you have for life at this point. It's really good to see. And I'm glad it's not bottled up anymore. I'm glad you're
me too.
living yourself. And so thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for sharing where people can reach out with you and hopefully can really make a difference in people's relationships. Thank you for being a guest on Life in Transition podcast today.
Oh, I was honored, Art. Thank you so much for asking me.
Oh, you're welcome. I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.